what I realised about singing, even before I could even intellectually articulate it, was those people were free. Part of his vision for Rose Tattoo establishing itself not just as a performing entity, but an idea. Okay, this is what we're going to do. We're going to take this outlaw stance.
So right from the start, you weren't actually rebelling against stuff. You were just declaring your right to be liberal and free.
Because people say to me, "Oh, you still angry?" And I go, "Yeah. Why wouldn't I be?" When I was a kid, I was angry about certain things. Yeah. I had this deep sadness about being, the victim of a pedophile, and I had to deal with domestic violence at home. I didn't know how. From that moment on, I didn't know how to function, and still don't.
Why isn't "We Can't Be Beaten" an anthem for the NRL?
Beats the out of me.
Angry Anderson.
Yes.
Lead singer of Rose
Fred
Tattoo. Welcome to the studio, mate.
Do you, first of all, being an E on the end, you don't pronounce the E, do you?
No, which would be unfortunate because I wouldn't consider myself a Paulie kind of journalist, but no, Paul will
Paulie as in...
Paulie as in...
Paulie?
Yeah.
P-double-O.
Yeah, don't call me Paulie, mate.
Oh, clever shit. I love it. A clever journo. How unusual.
An articulate rock star.
Absolutely. Touche.
Well, speaking of which, Rose Tattoo are coming up on their 50th anniversary pretty soon.
We're on what that feed, it's a movie channel.
Netflix?
Yes.
You're on Netflix?
Yes. Someone messaged me
that?
the otthe day and said, I was watching it on Netflix and I immediately thought it was Thunderdome, because Netflix movies, but it's the video stroke doco of us at Boggo Road.
What did you do at Boggo Road?
Oh, there was they opened up Boggo when they closed it down as a prison many years ago.
Yeah.
There's a quadrangle which is perfect, and up one end, there's got an elevated tiered section, and it's perfect for putting a stage on. And it's like a natural. It's not a beautifully tuned amphitheatre or acoustically, but it accommodates big crowds, so like 1,500 people, and possibly even close to 2. And they put a series of concerts on there. And
well, just so if people don't know, Boggo Road was the notoriously horrible prison in Queensland, wasn't it?
Well, yeah, indeed.
And the worst criminals went to Boggo Road, so they closed it down. Did any ex-residents turn up at this gig that you played?
I'm not sure, but there was a lot of people that looked like that.
So
not that I want to judge by looks.
No, well...
Certainly not.
So what year was that, Angry?
Oh, 20 years ago probably.
Right, okay.
Billy Thorpe was on it, the Divinals were on it, we were on it, a couple of other Spy versus Spy, I think. And there was a couple of days, it was like a weekend festival. Anyway, there's a very famous DVD that was spun out of it that featured ourselves. And Billy actually got up and did the encore with us. He'd played previously and or was going to play, I can't remember. But yeah, so it's this great moment where he got up with us, and which wasn't the first time, and we jammed on an old blues classic, Going Down, and it's become legendary because it's a great performance. The band was on fire, and Billy was on fire. Billy, he was just one of those guys.
Well, the reason I got you on, Angry, is because you started out literally as a rock and roll outlaw. You and your bandmates were pretty much on the edge, and you had one of your earliest hits was Rock and Roll Outlaw, but now you're a staunch conservative. How did that happen?
Well, I think the two things are very compatible in a strange, abstract way. But the outlaw thing came about because of the stance that we took, that we weren't going to. We were over. Some people say, they became punk because it was fashionable, but we were punk in the old school way, like Marlon Brando was a punk. The early rockers were all punks. Gene Vincent, Eddie Cochran, even Elvis for a few years maintained his punk status. So Jerry Lee was the ultimate punk because of the way that they rejected they were respectful of what came before them, but they weren't going to be told, in other words, they created this like, well, there are no rules. The only rule is there's no rules.
Yep.
And I don't mean in reference to Aleister Crowley, but when rock and roll, it was, everything was okay within the bounds of decency. So they become the first punks, really. So Rose Tattoo was formed in that, to follow up that sort of tradition, if you like, that we weren't going to take mainstream stance. We were going to... I remember talking to Peter in the early days about the ideology, if you like, behind the band, because, even the name Rose Tattoo is very... It's steeped in esoteric language, the rose being infinitely feminine, but it's also... The rose is... this is a very convoluted story. It hasn't been told in its entirety very many times, but
feel free to say
Rose is like the Knights of Templar had the rose as a symbol. There was the rose attached to the Mary Magdalene or the Marianne history story, romantic story. So the rose has been representative of esoterics or spiritual knowledge for many, many, many years. And Pete, that was not lost on him. And tattoo became the modern day manifestation of masculinity. This is before the hair bun brigade got hold of it and polluted it forevermore. Yeah. But that's another story. But so there's this wonderful symbolism in the name, and part of his perception or conception, part of his vision for Rose Tattoo establishing itself not just as a performing entity, but an idea, and which is something I latched onto very early. He had a very willing follower in me. As soon as he enlightened me to, okay, this is what we're going to do. We're going to take this outlaw stance. But when you say outlaw, it wasn't like highwaymen outlaw, give us your purse sort of thing.
Yeah,
It was going to be...
Well, by 1984, you'd recorded Freedom's Flame. And that's...
Yeah.
That, I mean, sorry to drag up, something that might be a bit dusty in the memory, but that song is now pretty pertinent these days, isn't it?
Yes, and
so right from the start, you weren't actually rebelling against stuff. You were just declaring your right to be liberal and free.
Well, absolutely, and it goes back to my obsession with two pivotal moments in our history. One, when I say obsession, I mean we were talking earlier about the recognition of Anzac Day. The other really important moment in our history for me, growing up as a kid in a household that was the religion was Masonry. My grandfather and other male members of the family were Masons, practicing Masons, and so there was this underlying because Masonry is not so much rebellious, but it was up in those days a secret society.
It's a bit cultish. Did you feel like you were growing up in a cult of some kind, or
sorry?
Did you feel like you were growing up in a cult of some kind?
No, not at all. Just a way of belief, if you like. Right. And what was mentioned quite often in the early days, I remember taking because we had relatives in Ballarat, and I remember as a kid, I don't think I was even in my teens. And we would drive, it was quite a trip in those days, we would drive to Ballarat to visit our relatives, and we would always go to the site of the Eureka Stockade. So the Eureka Stockade, even at school, I remember I wrote an essay about it and about what little history that I'd been able to glean from conversations of my elders in the family. Eureka was a significant occasion in our family. And I realised as I got older that a lot of people recognised what happened at Eureka, and it resonated with.
Well, not enough. Not enough people recognise what happened.
Not even
at Eureka.
today.
No, or even less today.
You know, because
Eureka Stockade was our revolutionary moment.
Well, I've read since then other views of, and those basic instincts that we have serve us well in a lot of cases through our lives. So I grew up recognising Eureka from a rebel's point of view, because we rebelled against the heavy hand of British rule, which was why it was put down so savagely and so brutally. That because it went on, as I learnt later in life, it went on for months after the actual battle of Eureka Stockade, the persecution of the people involved in it. They even hunted down people who supplied food and who sewed the flag, and they were meticulous in their stamping out any memory or connection with the Eureka Stockade. Now, years later, I read that it wasn't just about, or the suggestion was made that it wasn't just about the licensing for mining, but they were actually, it was the founding moments, if you like, of a movement throughout Australia where Australians were becoming Australians in the sense that, like, okay, we were brought here by the British, as predominantly in the early days as convicts. Now we're starting to grow in numbers, et cetera, and so there was an identity starting to emerge, if you like, which is based on rebellion. And if this alternative view of Eureka comes out to be true in time, and there's quite a bit of evidence to suggest that it was the beginnings of a movement towards separating from England.
Well, the parallels with America are uncanny. I mean, it's essentially it's an uprising against a taxation.
Yeah.
That was the founding of the United States of America.
Yeah.
And it was the moment when Australia had a chance to become independent as well. And, and as a result, come World War I, the best of an entire generation of men were slaughtered in Europe.
Yeah.
Imagine what Australia would be had we not been kowtowing to England then. But we're straying into history and geopolitics, Angry.
So
I want to ask you a question about Australian culture.
Well, getting back to Freedom's Flame, because
yes,
you're one of the few journalists that have ever asked me specifically about that song. Now, I mean, the ridiculous film clip that represented that song, that aside.
Right, yeah, okay.
Because it was,
we won't bring it up.
Please, let's not.
Yeah.
It's but the song was written in essence, about Eureka.
Oh, was it?
Yeah, that's what the spirit of Eureka. Let freedom's flame burn so bright that all the world will see. Let freedom's flame burn so bright that it shines down on you and me. So it was a way, it's a poet's way, if you like, of saying this was the bright spark and it was snuffed out.
Yeah.
But in a spiritual sense, it still burns as brightly as they ever hoped it would. If they'd achieved something.
But that sort of yearning for freedom, it's always, in Australia, it seems to be inevitably entwined with some sort of rebelliousness. But, I mean, I'm always bringing up America, but like in America, freedom is just being patriotic. In Australia, if you want to sing about freedom, you're singing about something rebellious. It's a bit odd, isn't it?
Well, yeah, I think what happened was, and it might be my selective memory, but I think that for a while there, it was accepted, if not popular, to be patriotic. And I remember during the 60s and the 70s, I remember like in more recent times, one of our ex-prime ministers said that there is no true Australian identity. But that's to do with New World Order politics, because if you don't have an identity, they can convince you of one, if you like, or build one into your psyche.
Yeah.
Whereas there's always been an Australian identity.
Yeah, yeah. And I speak as someone who was until recently a pretty devoted monarchist. I'm grateful for what Britain gave this country. I'm kind of questioning that these days. We might get back to that. But I wanted to talk about...
Of course you can question it. They abandoned us, if you like.
Yep.
Many, many years ago.
Yep.
Many, many years ago. They cut us out. So England stopped importing our product into their marketplace in lieu of, or, to trade with
Europeans,
Yeah. So that was the beginning of the rot, if you like.
Here's a question for you. Why did pub rock emerge in Australia? What is it about Australia that makes pub rock such an amazing part of our culture?
Well, there's two things that, as I see it, it's very simplistic, is that it was our turn. During the 60s, well, it actually started in the 50s, because the first live concert I saw was at Festival Hall, and there was about 8 acts on, and the last act on, and I think he only did like 5 or 6 songs, was Johnny O'Keefe.
Oh, right.
And he had a band, like a 6-piece band, and then there was the Deltones singing doo-wops.
Yeah.
And Johnny O'Keefe came out and just tore the place to pieces. And I'm looking around, because it was my first experience with hysteria. And it was predominantly girls, of course, but guys were going off their nuts. And I'm only a kid. This is in the 50s, right? So then came the explosion out of Britain, predominantly, which really ignited the flame here in Australia. We had world-class talent. And all of a sudden, bands popped up everywhere, and in a lot of cases, Billy Thorpe, we talked about before, he had a band called the Aztecs, and he was the singer.
Yeah.
But he emerged as a bigger talent. Johnny was the singer in his band. So we were producing world-class musicians and singers. And the venues that they were playing in were festival halls, and or town halls that had a bigger auditorium, because they were ex-dance. They were set up for ballroom dancing.
Yeah.
So they had a stage and they had the curtains and all this kind of stuff. But as the new breed of the budding musicians started to come up, you couldn't play those venues because they were reserved for the stars that had already established themselves. So what's on the corner of every street in Australia? A pub.
Sometimes 4 on every corner.
Well, you see, live music in pubs was not a new thing. Drinkers would stay there and drink and...
So Rose Tattoo's brand of music, though, heavily blues-oriented. You guys started out in blues, didn't you?
Absolutely.
Right?
Everything I've ever been involved in, musically, was based on the blues. All these blues artists that I was exposed to by my Uncle Ivan, who was the youngest of the Anderson boys, and he introduced me to English, to all kinds of music, and predominantly American. And he was a musician. He was a drummer in a swing band, but he also played trumpet, and later on he became a very good keyboard player and a very good singer, as was my biological father, Colin. He was a great, when I say great singer, he had a great voice. He had a really, really good voice, and a very, very accomplished harmonica player.
Rose Tattoo emerged in Australia at the same time as AC/DC and Midnight Oil. Midnight Oil. You travelled. You toured a bit with Midnight Oil, didn't you?
No, back in the day we played on the same bill.
Because Midnight Oil bore me to tears. I do. There's a couple of early albums of theirs that I thrashed when I was a young bloke, but they seem obliged or seem compelled for some reason to just mix it up with crazy left-wing politics.
Well,
I find it a deterrent.
the thing about it is, I think, in defence of that, I'm not trying to defend, but I'm just saying, when I first saw them, Garrett still had hair, and they were.
Geez, that's going back a while.
Yeah, we were all living in the eastern suburbs, and what I liked about the Oils was that they, Garrett had bare feet, he had hair down to here, he was a surfy, surfer, surfer. And they represented, I just thought they were very Australiana, and that was what I was attracted to.
You told me once a funny story that, your early days were in some pretty rough pubs in hard neighbourhoods of Melbourne. And when you started to the band started to cast the net a bit further, you found yourself in the northern suburbs of Sydney, beachside suburbs, which is a far more middle class and a bit more sedate. And you and the boys said, "Oh well, at least up here there won't be as many fights in the pub," and you were disappointed. There actually were.
Oh yeah, it's I mean some of the best stroke. No, I can't say that because it glorifies it. It's some of the biggest stinks that we were ever involved in was in Adelaide.
Oh really?
Yeah, really, with the Adelaide Sharps, and back in the day, there was a crossover period of about 2 and 3 years where the English, and there's a big English contingency in Elizabeth, which is a suburb of Adelaide, as there is in Melbourne.
Right.
There was Broadmeadows, which was a couple of suburbs up from where I grew up, and they were the English migrants, and they were housed in old army bases, etc., in both cases. And so there was this clash between the two boy cultures, or the two street cultures, which was in Australia was Sharps, and then within a couple of years we started to see this influx of English migrants that were young boys, and they were all skinheads.
Right.
Now eventually they agreed to differ and they merged, and the skinhead movement, so to speak, took over the Sharp movement, because the Sharp movement was pretty much contained, if you like, into Melbourne and Adelaide. So there were these...
Can you define a Sharp?
They were gamblers. They frequented the racetracks and fights. Boxing. And they were called Sharpies because they always dressed. My biological father was one of them.
Right.
Because he was a jockey by profession, and but through my grandfather, who I found out was a chauffeur for many years as a young bloke. He was the chauffeur for one of Victoria's most notorious criminals. But that's all. I've got to save that for the book.
Okay.
But yeah, so there was always that association in our family, and it was very, very common, that when jockeys were on a winning streak, they went out and bought brand new suits. They bought a car, the sort of things that you do with instant wealth. Mm. And then, like 6 months later, he'd sort of disappear, and within a few weeks, when he stopped payments, the people would arrive in a truck and take all our furniture. And it devastated Mum on several occasions. It was a heartbreaking experience because all the neighbours are out in the street, like consoling Mum.
Seeing your stuff getting repossessed.
Yeah. And the neighbours bringing stuff to replace it.
That's a different.
That's when neighbours were neighbours.
That's a different Australia right there.
Yeah.
Your upbringing was pretty tough, wasn't it, Ango?
Oh, no tougher than most of the kids that I grew up with, and there were some that had worse situations than I did. I mean, there were several people. I mean, Colin was aggressive, physically and emotionally, more emotionally. Because he very much belittled Mum and tortured her emotionally with words and threats and accusations, and but he wasn't a wife beater per se. Whereas there were a couple of people, one in our street and a couple a street over, because everyone knew everyone's business in those days, and yeah, they were genuine wife beaters. They would come home drunk and beat up the missus. And as the kids got older too, I mean, I went to school with kids, and you know, being an all-boys school, we had a bond which was, and I still cling to this day. It was a special thing about being in a boys' school. And we can deal with the education system at another date.
Yeah.
But, you know, and boys were educated to be boys, male, right? So there was lots of sports, there was lots of contact, there was lots of fist fights, there was lots of...
And you were the smallest guy at the school, weren't you?
Well, I tried to shy away from it, two things. One was preservation, because I'm a little bloke.
Yeah.
And the other was that I'd had enough of domestic violence, if you like, at home, you know. So I just didn't see the sense in getting involved in something where you knew you were going to come off second best. And the few times that I did get involved, and even going back to the band, in the early days of the band, very few times did I actually participate in you know, fisticuffs.
Yeah.
And 9 times out of 10, I was always bested, because you know I wasn't a natural brawler.
Yeah. But that's a different Australia you're talking about now. How much has it changed in your opinion? I mean, Rose Tattoo is still around, right? So Australia hasn't changed that much, but how much has it changed?
But the rebellion, and I'm glad you brought that up.
Yeah.
Because people say to me, "Oh, well, you know, you're still angry," and I go, "Yeah, why wouldn't I be?" When I was a kid, I was angry about certain things.
Yeah.
I had this deep sadness about being, you know, the victim of a pedophile, and you know, I had to deal with domestic violence at home. And
can you just elaborate on do you mind elaborating on that? The victim of a pedophile. What happened?
Oh well, you know what pedophiles do? They sexually abuse children. So
how old were you?
Oh, when it first started, I think I was about 5 or 6.
And was he a teacher or a family friend? Or what?
Yeah.
Right. That's tough.
So it'll all come out in the book.
Yeah. Okay.
It was. When you say tragic, any child that is abused in any form, that's a tragedy. Because what it does, in most cases, if not all cases, it alters your trajectory, if you like. You're heading in a direction as a growing, you know, child. And then this happens to you. So all of a sudden, the trajectory that you were committed to, like through the natural course of events, is altered, right? So you're no longer on that path. And when you go into therapy later in life, which this is the point of view I'm talking from, is that you then really have to deal with the new trajectory. You have to try and absorb, if you like, or make sense of, which as a child is difficult, if not impossible. So it commits you to a path, in most cases, and mine was a typical one, of dysfunction. I didn't know how, from that moment on, I didn't know how to function, and still don't, which is quite sad. I mean, I don't want to come across as like, oh, it's such a tragic story,
no,
but it's just so typical, and I still struggle.
Well, people who haven't been a victim can never grasp, I think, what you've just said. I mean, well, you've said it very clearly, that your path in life, when you say, you know, you're set on a path in life, mate, you're a child. You know, you're just growing up. You're not conscious of a path that you're heading on, really.
No.
You're just growing up and discovering the world and loving your parents and forming friendships and finding things that you're interested in. And then suddenly, that's normal. And then suddenly what happened to you happens. And then, you know, your mind alters and it never recovers by the sound of things. And like I said, people who've never had that happen to them can't understand how fundamental that shift is. But did that put you on a path to rock and roll? I mean, it did, right?
Yeah.
Okay. But how angry were you?
Well, in therapy, we looked at what they call the dynamics of your development. And when you reach, as you're going into puberty, there's several things that take place simultaneously. This is the natural order of things, right? So you becoming, so like approaching puberty in a traditional sense, you know, you're 11, you're 12, you're 13, all the, 13. That used to really mean something once, the teen.
Yeah.
So it meant, I'm no longer a kid. But there was another untaught, unspoken about responsibility that came with that. So that period of transition is called puberty, because you slide up into it and then it peaks and your head's all over the place, your body's all over the place, blah, blah, blah. So in therapy, we looked at the dynamics of that. And children that are inherently sad because of the damage they've sustained, because that's a sadness. Because see, we don't understand the process of mourning. But when you're the victim of a pedophile as a child, you go into mourning because you've lost something. You've lost your innocence. You've lost your naivety. You've lost your childhood, and all of a sudden you're propelled into this adult world because it's adults that you're dealing with.
And mourning is an adult concept. I mean, or mourning is something that only adults should have to deal with. I mean, you're too young to be mourning.
So you don't, but see, you mourn. You even as an infant, we now are grasping or grappling with the concept that, like at 5 or 6 years old, a child mourns the passing of being a baby. But with a loving, nurturing parents, you know, you've got this, you know, these two, not opposing, but these two balancing qualities in your life. So the sadness, when you get to puberty, this sadness starts to not be a sort of dull, aching, in the background thing. It starts to come up and emerge, just like your hormones. As they approach puberty, you know, they say, oh, his hormones are raging, you know, all he can think about is tits and bums. But the same with girls, right? But they handle it in a much more delicate, if you like, way.
Was your anger a response to that sadness?
Absolutely, because that's what I was about to say, that in therapy, when you deal with the dynamics, the sadness, which all children that are abused feel. Now, some kids, and this is the minority, they act very violently very early. They become destructive. They become, disobedient, etc., etc. And it's a way of expressing this rage they feel, the damage that they've sustained. Whereas predominantly in the majority of us, you get to puberty, it either manifests itself as you withdraw completely. You cannot deal with it. It's just too awful. And you mightn't even, I talked about this in therapy. I remember saying to the therapist, I can't exactly remember what happened. I just know that it was awful. I have nightmares about it. I have dreams about it.
You still have nightmares?
Yeah, to a certain degree from time to time. But I mean, I've learnt to deal with this thing. So you either withdraw. I mean, like I said, there's a minority that become very early, very destructive, very disobedient. They're children, I don't know what's going on. I can't understand what's going on with this kid. You know, like, and the kid's like 8 and, you know, putting hammers through TVs and whatever, you know, but unnatural, because that's not natural for a kid, you know. But anyway, having said that, so when the majority of us get sadder, and then you withdraw, and then you look to alcohol and drugs or a dark lifestyle. You know, you withdraw completely. You just don't want to deal with it because it's just too. And sadly, in a lot of cases, as this emerging not child, not adult, you think, well, like you sort of internalise that parents or older people did this to me. So you learn to distrust people of a parental age, whether it's your own parents or whether it's your extended family or anyone that occupies a position of power that's of a parental age. So
finding yourself in a rock and roll band must have been...
Well, actually, but see, I took the other path.
Yeah.
That's when people recede back into the darkness. I decided to do, and it wasn't a conscious decision. Huey, in her infinite wisdom, said like you can deal with this, and you can expose your anger, because the sadness manifests. It grows into being anger, and the wisdom of the divine is such that, in my case, like so many places, like you, if you were to ask 100% of all the musicians, somewhere between 60 and 80% have a similar story to me, which propels them into, because in my case, I was introduced to music at a very early age. Now, I was dealing with the dysfunction of my new parental home, which was, I spent the first 6 years of my life living with my grandparents. So my grandfather rejected my mother on first sight.
So your dad's dad rejected your mum? Right,
yeah.
okay.
As did, and the rest of the family did not grow towards her in an affectionate way, because Jack, my grandfather, forbade it. He just said no.
What was the problem? Why did they reject her? Was it religious?
Well, she was Roman Catholic. And she's Mauritian.
Right.
So she's darker skinned and, has the appearance of an islander. And, spoke French and was a Roman Catholic, and all the things that my grandfather just couldn't accept.
So what religion, were they Protestant on your dad's side?
Masons.
Oh, they were Masons, of course, yes.
And Masonry in those days and Roman Catholicism hadn't reached this sort of awkward sort of acceptance of one another, like happens today.
Yeah.
And I think, having read the history of both, it's just an unhealthy alliance, because it's not based on truth and real acceptance. They tolerate one another.
Yeah. So finding yourself in a rock and roll band, how did that save you from the sadness?
Because music has always been there to protect me, somewhere to hide, somewhere to... later on, when I started to emulate these amazing instruments, voices, that I'm hearing on records, I thought, like these people, it's a sense of wonderment for me that they, they sang. They sang. Yeah. And the more I listened to the blues, the more it wasn't all about, flowers and, some of my favourite writers, Gershwin, all those kind of people, Rodgers and Hammerstein, whatever, the traditional, they wrote beautiful love songs, but they also wrote beautiful songs. And now that I go back and listen to some of those lyrics, I think, yeah, it's a love song, but there's more to it than that.
Well, you're talking like a conservative now. I mean, you obviously have a deep appreciation for the Western civilizational art, do you?
Absolutely. I was where I was drawn in was instinctively, and this is where I place a lot of value and emphasis on instincts. I believe absolutely with every fibre of my being that what I realised about singing, even before I could even intellectually articulate it, was those people were free. Those people, and I remember years and years later, and I can't remember who it was. It was someone like Roberta Flack or someone like that, but they said, to sing is to give your emotions wings, so they can fly. They can fly as a bird, right? So, and that, that's an old poetic view of singing. But that's true in a spiritual sense. You give your innermost emotions wings to fly. And when you write a song, that's what you do. You commit your thoughts and your feelings and your views into lyric form. So once you've done that, I remember having a discussion once with someone years ago about songwriting. And I said, the great thing about recording music is it completes the cycle. Because when you write a song or be involved in writing a song, I'm a lyric writer, I'm not a musician, and then you record it, then it completes the cycle, because then it belongs to everyone. It's no longer yours. You give it out. And that's what music's all about. And
so are Rose Tattoo fans as sort of... are they all philosophically aligned with you? I mean, are they an army of freedom fighters, Angry?
I would, in a romantic sense, I'd say yes. I've had so many over the years talk about Freedom's Flame, talk about, any other number of songs. And I go, like, apart from the fact that they pay you great tribute when they say, like, in my moments of my darkest despair, I turn to your songs to draw strength, etc. That's a very humbling experience. So, and it might not, well, in most cases, not just your music, it's music generally, but they are fans. They love Rose Tat's music, right? So, and so you know that they get it, and you can't follow a band like Rosie Tats. You can just for the music, for the joy of it. But once, going back to Midnight Oil, there's certain bands, once you look past the bleeding bloody obvious, which is the total entertainment part, right? So what it looks like, what it smells like, what it feels like, what it tastes like, and it's all a sensory thing. And then you think, like, there's more to this, it's an instinctive feeling again.
Yeah.
There's more to it, there's a depth here that I didn't realise on my first 2, 10, 20 listenings.
Yeah.
But slowly but surely it starts to seep in. And, I like to think that I'm clever enough to hide things, but I'm also honest enough that some things I don't want to hide or can't.
Yeah.
They have to be said, in plain speaking English. So there's not the room to misinterpret what I mean.
No, right, yeah. Well, you're a very, let's say, prosaic sort of guy, mate. I mean, your lyrics are...
Please explain.
Well, prosaic is the opposite end of poetry. Like poetry can be ambiguous and florid,
yes,
whereas your lyrics are direct.
Yeah.
And unambiguous.
You don't think that some of it's...
Well, some of it...
poetic?
No, some of it... I'm backing myself into a corner.
No, you're not. No, I'm just...
No. I mean, there's enormous creativity in the lyrics you write, but mostly it's quite direct and not too ambiguous, that's a quality. That's what rock and roll's about.
It is in a sense too, because you can become too clever, I think.
You can.
Where people just aren't, they're not going to get the point, or they're going to miss the point. Where, like when you think of some of the most amazing lyrics, American Pie, but like the standout song, I mean, I love American Pie, but the song of his is Vincent for me. Right. Because I could have told you, Vincent.
Yeah.
This
world is
like,
too beautiful.
Just that phrase.
Yeah.
I could have told you, Vincent. And my heart aches.
Yeah.
Because there's no confusing what he's saying.
Yeah.
Starry, starry night. You know what I mean? It's like, oh, Jesus,
I
stop.
tell you what, Angry, I didn't have Angry Anderson singing Starry, Starry Night at me on my bingo card.
Oh, it's one of my favourite lyrics of all time.
Well, there you go.
Oh, yeah, for absolutely sure. Because, see, he's the last of a line of troubadours as far as music goes, is the way I see it. Like, Bob Dylan, who took his inspiration from Woody Guthrie. Now, when you go back and, listen to Woody Guthrie, so he wrote brutally honestly. Like, he wrote about the corruption of government, and he lived through the Great Depression. He was a railway traveller, and he travelled the country, and he wrote about what he saw. So he was brutally honest about it, as was Bob Dylan, because he took most of his inspiration from Woody Guthrie as a lyricist, but as a person of great conscience and a person who felt the heartbeat of the country. In a lot of people, romantic songs, they go, well, he was the heartbeat. Well, he probably was for a while, because he was the one that articulated it the best. But when you listen to those classic Dylan songs, not just the banner wavers like Times Are a Changin' and that, which are so vitally important to the development of lyric writing. Certainly in my case they were, because Dylan once said when he was very young, I know he learnt this off Woody Guthrie and others around him at the time, that you write about what you know, you write the truth, and then you've written something that's worthwhile. And going back to Pete's vision of Rose Tattoo, it was always going to be a band that spoke for males. In an era where, apart from the punk revolution that it railed against all authority, etc., but the predominance of lyric writing in rock and roll always was about men's view grappling with this absurd situation with the opposite gender, And the basis of rock and roll lyrics was always about,
seducing women.
Well, yeah, but just trying to deal with it.
Yeah.
Trying to deal with it.
So was that a conscious thing? Rose Tattoo was going to be a blokes band?
Yeah, in Pete's vision, absolutely. I remember him saying, we would have the balance of both. Hence the name Rose Tattoo, which is taken from a novel of the same name, The Rose Tattoo, and we should Google it, but I'm pretty sure it's a Tennessee Williams novel.
I'll look it up while you're talking.
Yeah, why don't you? Yes, let's be modern. Let's be frightfully modern. And it was the book is written about in an esoteric language, which is, I think, lost on most people at the time. That it's written about because it's the two main characters in the book and in the film is a male and a female of absolutely diverse backgrounds. In other words, they had really, really little in common except lust.
Right.
I
can tell you, it's a 3-act play by Tennessee Williams.
There you go.
Right. Yep. Exploring themes of love, loss, and the complexities of human emotions, set in a Gulf Coast village between New Orleans and Mobile.
Bingo.
Well done.
Now the movie.
Now, you know what I find amazing about you, Angry, is that you are so well read. Your understanding of politics is quite complex. I think you have a pretty good grasp on how corrupt politics is.
I had a close look at it, you remember, a couple of years ago.
Well, you did.
I ran
as
a candidate,
Yeah, for the National Party, right?
Yeah.
How did it go?
Well, it was destined to failure, which appealed to my sort of poetic, gloriously defeated. But I remember when I first, the first guy that interested me in taking a position, I thought at that time, so we're going back close to 20 years ago, I thought, my last days in music are ahead of me, but immediately ahead of me. Mm. So what am I going to do with the energy, my, views, whatever? What am I going to do? How can I channel my energies? And I had a great friend. In '96, I did an infomentary for the program I was doing for Channel 9 then called Challenge, and we went across Kokoda. And I met Charlie Lynn, who was a member of the Legislative Council. He'd been a professional soldier. He got out of soldiering. He went into politics. Romantically, naively, he thought, he could make a difference, and he did. He made a contribution because he was straight-backed, honest, like immovable with what he knew about right and wrong. And he always defended the little guy, so to speak, as poetic or cliche as that may sound. But, he's true blue, tried and true. And I took inspiration from him. And I was doing the Challenge series for 9, and they said, well, there's a commemorative occasion coming up for Kokoda, and this guy wrote to us, Charlie, and said, "Are you interested in? I'll take a party over because that's what he does when the Parliament wasn't sitting. He used to take treks, and he was a well-established trekker, leader of treks across the trail, track, whatever you like to call it. So he said, look, Kokoda desperately needs recognition. And he said, I think this would appeal to... He said to me later, he'd read a few things about me, so he'd done a bit of homework. And he said, this is what I propose. And I was just so excited with the idea. This is before... Of course, the reality, once you get into the jungle, that's when you're then. Oh Jesus, you got no idea.
Really?
He said, mate, you should train up, and I said, well, I go to gym. He goes, no, I mean really train. Get a pack on and get on the walker and like stippler, and learn how to carry a pack and blah blah. Yeah, it'll be right. And. When I say soul destroying, what Kokoda does for you is at first is that it rips you to pieces physically and emotionally, intellectually, destroys you, and then it can rebuild you. And in that wonderful sense of making something positive out of something so painful, which is life itself, that's what we do on an ongoing basis, whether we realise it or not. I remember talking to Charlie about it. And so anyway, 15 years later, that was in '96, and we did that for television. Wildly successful program. And so 15 years later, we'd stayed in contact, myself and Charlie, because I was enamoured with him. He's a fantastic guy, a real Australian, in a sense, a hero in a sense, but like I said, straight backed. He's the real deal.
How long did he spend in the Legislative Council?
20-something years.
Right. Okay. So he talked you into running.
Well, so 15 years later, I rang him up and I said, "Listen, I'm going to have a run for Parliament." Now, in that few years before that decision, I'd gone in. I'd met friends of his within the Nationals Party, because he wasn't a Nationals member, but a lot of his friends, because his politics resonated with them as they did with him. So, so anyway, it was an ongoing process with myself to get more drawn towards politics, because I thought, well, having read history, on every level of the development of what we call now civilisation, there has been the political influence which has been there. I remember years and years ago, I went to a garage sale, and there was this guy. He had hundreds of books, predominantly paperback. So I'm looking through the books, in certain boxes that were hardbacks. And I said, oh, you know, and I'm really interested in this, really interested in that. So, and I bought one box of hard covers, and he said, you might be interested in these. So I looked in one box, and there was the Colleen McCullough series on Rome. And there's about 8 or 10 books at that stage. They're all like this thick. And I'd met Colleen McCullough when I was doing Midday.
Of course, yeah.
Fascinated by her as a person. There's another great Australian.
Right.
One of our greatest, I think.
I've got to confess, I didn't know she'd written a thorough history of the Roman Empire.
She, at one stage, Fred, and I don't mean to propose to educate you, but she, at one stage, was one of the 3 leading authorities, historically accurate authorities on Rome. She had people, professors of Rome, teaching Rome history at universities around the world, used to ring her to cross-section. She had the biggest database outside of a university. She had the biggest collection outside of a university of all works pertaining to Rome. Yeah. Oh, yeah.
And can you summarise what did you learn? Did you read her books thoroughly? Did you read them?
Absolutely.
So can you summarise what you learnt from those books?
That politics has always been corrupt. And that politics...
You didn't need to read all of Colleen McCullough's books to learn that.
It's an ongoing theme. Deals with the Senate. It deals with...
Well, the assassination of Julius Caesar is the ultimate example because it set in motion a whole bunch of events that pretty much led to the end of the empire.
Even the expansion of empire.
Yes, yeah.
How it strengthened for a glorious period and then weakened.
Yeah.
And brought about the downfall.
And you know how Australia fits into that context, I think, is that we were founded 12 years after the declaration of independence in the United States, in America, and we were founded as the sort of tail end of the British Empire. And now at the start of the 21st century, we find ourselves as a bastion of Western civilized democracy in a world that is decreasingly democratic and increasingly dangerous, and the West itself is fracturing quite a lot. And
absolutely.
Australia...
All going to plan.
Well, we'll get back to that. But Australia is, if I'm not mistaken, the only nation in history that is its own continent. We have enough resources to feed and fuel the world. And what are we doing about it? We are going down the same plug hole that everyone else is. We have one of the most unique opportunities in world history, and we are absolutely ignoring it.
One of the books that I'm rereading at the moment is The Lucky Country.
Oh, Donald Horne, yes.
And The Loss Of.
The Loss Of.
There's
the misunderstood thing about Donald Horne's book is that he was being sardonic. Australia is a lucky country run by
idiots.
Yeah, or people who people who share its misfortune or something. But yeah, idiots essentially. I think Australia peaked in the 80s. I'm not saying that because you and I had our best years were in the 80s, but I went to Bob Hawke's memorial at the Opera House when he died. And it was like a memorial to Australia in the 1980s. That's what they were reminiscing about.
Yeah.
It wasn't Bob.
Yeah.
It was Australia's freedom and prosperity and culture all peaked in that decade, if you ask me.
Yeah. We had the best and worst. It's the best of times, it's the worst of times. I remember saying to Bob Hawke, I said, you know what really, really woke me up was that Gough largely laid all the groundwork or opened the doors for the New World Order to start to take control of Australia. I said, and then to add insult to injury, Malcolm Fraser completed the job. And he laughed. And he went, he just looked at me and he went like, and he didn't acknowledge in a sense like, oh yeah, no, you're right.
He knew.
It was his body language. And I thought, like I've pushed a tender spot or struck a chord, but that's when we were sold out.
Well, I'd
and
say
it was both sides.
That process was accelerated enormously by Keating, who.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, I don't know. I can't really articulate the ins and outs of it, but
he floated the dollar and deregulated all our.
He deregulated the banks.
Yeah, yeah.
So what he did, I mean, it's a very simplistic view, and I get that because I'm a Luddite, but he said to the world banking cartel, "You can have Australia too," because we used to have. Now, like I said, going back to the Lucky Country, the loss of the Lucky Country. There's another book I'm reading too now called Lucky Be Damned, which I read back in the day when it was first written, around about this time.
I haven't read that book. What is it?
Oh yeah, it's a beauty. I'll send you the author and that. And there's another one called What Will We Tell Our Children? And they're all written about the same time. It's about migration.
Oh, really?
And the weaponisation of migration. And that's when I started to realise, now, wait a minute, this is not about compassion. This is not about taking care of people that, are desperate to the point of dying in their desperation. This is a political movement. And there's another one called Amongst the Barbarians, which was a very controversial... I'll send you this list.
Yeah, yeah.
But...
Yeah. So let's put that in the context of the current election. So the Peter Dutton is saying we're going to reduce migration by 25%. That's probably
rubbish.
In my
rubbish.
I doubt they will. In my
he's
opinion,
he's a lying piece of excrement because he's committed. He's the whole left.
And so both sides are committed, right? So whose orders are they taking? Why are they doing it? It's clear. The effect is obvious.
What my real view?
Please.
The destruction of the Western society.
At whose orders?
The people that Keating handed our banks to. The Rothschilds and all that. And everyone goes, oh, mate, please, that's an old furphy. It's an old wives' tale. You go, have you read history? And there's enough.
What can Australian voters do to try to stem this? I mean,
fuck them up. Fuck them up. There's enough independents that have... I mean, I know you say Pauline Hanson and everyone goes... you say Clive Palmer and you go like, okay, what has he ever done? Oh, I robbed his workers. Oh, did he? Or is that what you read in the press?
Yeah. Well, the media's in on
it. I think there's enough people that are putting their hands up these days.
I had one of the People First candidates in here last week, and that's the party that's founded by Jared Rennick, who's the smartest guy to ever ever appear in our federal parliament, possibly. They represent the people, but the two major parties don't.
No. Okay, getting back to when I ran for the Nationals, and I realised that head office, because when I first joined the Nationals, Charlie said, I think they're best suited to you because you're so patriotic, you're so Aussie. You're so, when you say naive, you're romantically inclined. You stick to the old world values, blah, blah, blah. He said, I think you're more, because at that stage I actually had joined the Liberal Party and just so that I could, register. Like, you have to be a registered member of a party to put yourself up for candidacy. And I remember being at a lunch at Parliament House with Charlie, and he hosted the lunch, and there was all these Nationals there. And I met them, and I was very, very... I was very, very entertained by what they said and how they spoke, and to the point where I thought, this is the party for me, and not just because of Charlie's suggestion, but that had a big influence on me.
So did you run at a state or federal level?
Both.
Right, you ran twice.
Yes. The first time I ran for a federal seat, which was between the Illawarra and the Highlands, which was called Throsby.
Yep.
Which has been now boarded and it's called another thing. And then...
How did you go?
We increased the vote for the Nationals by 10% or more, which was apparently huge.
What was it like being Angry Anderson out on the campaign trail?
Well, it was exciting. But, I mean, the Illawarra, which is the two-thirds of the voting...
That's hardcore Labor.
I rusted on.
Yeah, okay.
Right. And even though they were ready for a change, they should have grasped the moment, not just to give me a job, but it was a moment where they could have really broken from the past.
So you ran again. You
took anyway,
that on the chin and ran.
I ran for Cessnock.
Yep.
And again, I found out that the party room, so to speak, here in Sydney was, they just wanted they give us nothing. No monetary help, nothing. And at a time when I was going through an extremely hard time, my stepfather, who I absolutely adored, was had a heart attack, and he was not well. He eventually died, his second heart attack, not too long after. So I was trying to deal with that. My brother was dying terminal cancer. I knew that my mother was showing the first signs of dementia. And, there was a lot going on in my private life. And to realise that we had no support from head office, I was made aware, while I was campaigning in Throsby, that there was division ideologically wise. So in other words, what I was being told by young Nationals that worked in the offices, because, they always staff with bright young people, schooling them up, coming up through the ranks. And two of them came down to campaign with me in Throsby. And after a while, they said, there's opposition, they would have been horrified had I won.
For what reason?
Because I was,
too conservative.
as I was described in boardroom meetings, illiterate, I was a loose cannon, and I wasn't party faithful.
In what way? What were you not?
Well,
what policies were you not faithful to?
I wasn't. I don't know, but I wasn't towing the line. I said. I remember saying, down there they had a huge ice problem. There's a huge unemployment. I said, why aren't we out campaigning on these issues about the deals that were made between the unions and the state, state politics, the premiers, and about they all knew that they're going to close down the factories, the steel down there and down. They knew years and years. They just didn't tell anyone. Fred, who makes a decision for a country to stop making its own fuel?
Is it the Rothschilds or is it the government?
It was our government.
Yeah.
But what I'm saying is, if the decisions, and it's irrelevant which side of politics made the decision, but why wasn't there an Australia-wide strike or go slow or whatever, the union tactics? The Australian public needs to know that this government, whether it be Labor or Liberal, wants to destroy the industry within Australia that makes our own fuel. And let that sink in for a while, right? So when I first heard that, I went, wait a minute, we're an island continent. So if we produce our own fuel, we're not super self-sufficient. But you alluded to it a while ago, and I'll get back to that in a second. you don't make your own fuel. You used to, you have done historically, which means it's irrelevant what goes on outside you. I mean, okay, we get shipments of oil, we process it and make it fuel. There's oil in Australia. So we could be, as far as fuel for our machines, like combustion machines, which includes our military, all branches of the military. We made our own petrol, we made our own diesel. Where were the unions to turn around and go, no, wait a minute, this is not going to happen. We'll shut the country down, but we are going to keep producing our own fuel.
So,
simplistically put, I know, but
your close encounter with politics seems to have revealed to you that politics is not about solving problems or making the country better.
No. I remember years ago, someone said to me, blah, 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 whatever, blah, blah. I said, they need the nurses underpaid because it's a political football. They both use it. Perfect example, right? The packages that these largely visiting people on student visas or tourist visas that are out at every building site with the stop-go sign, our nurses should be on the same packages. And then there'd be no problem with underpaid nurses. These people, largely South America, but not exclusively, from my observation, from what I can gather, they're all new signed up members of the union for a start. But they're on like 90 grand.
And the rest? Some of them are on six figures.
Well, some of them with, extraordinary loadings and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
I mean, that's...
And they spend all day holding that sign and checking Facebook with the other hand.
Yeah.
Angry, we're running out of time because the viewers will be fascinated to know that your parking ticket is about to expire. I've got one last question for you, Angry.
Go. Until next time.
Until next time. Why isn't We Can't Be Beaten an anthem for the NRL?
Beats the fuck out of me. I can't believe... It Can't Be Beaten and Bound for Glory, yes, they're our songs. Well, Bound for Glory was a solo album. I know sportsmen and women are in just about every code. I'm talking hockey, I'm talking netball, we're talking basketball, talking football, obviously, union, cricket, tennis. I mean, Bound for Glory was the Davis Cup theme song for a year, many years ago when it came out. It was the theme song that the Paralympians picked to go to Barcelona. But yeah, I mean, I even said to the publisher, I said, I've written more sporty type lyrics, but resolves itself in We Can't Be Beaten. And they said, no one's interested.
That's because the powers that be don't want us to be beaten. Angry?
Well, that's
Thanks, mate.
Hey, it's a pleasure. Always, brother.
Good on you.
Always.
Thanks, Angry.